Hello, Paul.
Thank you. Through the Chair. This report is more administrative and housekeeping in nature. It's got two parts. The first is the transfer of Auckland Transport bylaws to Auckland Council, and the second is the transfer of the Auckland Transport policies and plans to Council. On the Auckland Transport bylaws, the legislation requires Council to make minimum changes necessary to complete the transfer. This includes, for example, very basic stuff, replacing Auckland Transport with Auckland Council as the bylaw maker, referencing the role of local boards that are prescribed in the legislation, and making some consequential changes to hang it all together. You will notice the report also suggests some changes to the delegation split for future reviews between this committee and the Regulatory and Safety Committee. And you'll all know that the Regulatory and Safety Committee to date has been responsible for all bylaw reviews. The report suggests that the vehicle use and parking bylaw is the main transport related bylaw within this committee's remit. That said though, the committee could consider referring even that bylaw to the Regulatory and Safety Committee, just noting that any proposed changes and the final decision to make a bylaw resides with the governing body, and so all members will still get a chance to review any of those changes should you be comfortable with that position. For the Auckland Transport policies and plans, a similar approach is recommended to make very minimal changes necessary to give effect to the legislated transfer of those policies and plans to the Council. And just lastly, I'd like to note that all of those Auckland Transport bylaws have a scheduled review date, and that a program to review the policies and plans will be developed at a later date as well. So accompanying me is Hamish and Werner, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, team. Anything, Hamish, Werner? Nothing? Questions, John Gillan.
Thank you. Look, I'm happy with this except for one part, which is the part that's going to be delegating the special events and filming decision making to governing body rather than local boards. And I just wonder if you could explain that, please, because if that happens, then local boards won't be able to. They won't be making these decisions themselves. They'll likely be delegating it onto staff, but they won't be able to recall it back or have input into it. It's part 25, or sorry, part 6, then section 25.
And did you have a clause reference for that too that I'm trying to find? Clause 25, special events and filming. Is that the one you're referring to?
Sorry, page 2 of attachment A has the interpretation which mentions that clause 25 will be going to the governing body, and then if you scroll down to page 6, it's under part 6, special events and filming, 25, special events and filming, that part there.
So I'm still not sure if we're looking at the same thing, because the one that I'm looking at, and apologies because I don't have numbers on the web version, but it's in the grey box, and clause 25, which is special events and filming, excluding matters related to governing body resolutions. That is something that local boards will have control of. Not sure if that answers your question as to that local boards do have some allocated decision-making powers. And I suppose the only other thing to add is that because the allocations are prescribed in statute, we aren't really in a position to change them.
Okay, sorry, I might be reading this around the wrong way then, so that's okay. Thanks. Thank you.
No further questions? Thank you, team. Someone like to move? Thank you, Lotu. Seconded, Shane. Any discussion, debate? Put it as per. All those in favour say aye. And against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, the road classification framework. So Hamish is back and All yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With me today, my name's Hamish Bunn, Strategic Transport Lead with Auckland Council, and with me I've got Verna Pretorius from Auckland Transport, who's been assisting with the production of the roads classification framework. I believe we had some slides. I've got the beeper. So you'll recall that the transition legislation required Auckland Council to develop a road classification framework, and what this basically does is it's a means for allocating transport decision making between local boards and the governing body, with the basic idea that the governing body is responsible for arterials, which are defined as including city centre, Eden Park and residual roads, which I'll come back to in a moment, whereas local boards receive increased or get to make some decisions on local and collector roads. So we need to develop this framework and then propose it to the Minister for final approval, for endorsement before it's endorsed by Council at the end. So we're really seeking your approval of the framework as it stands so it can go to the Minister for final consideration. In terms of the development of this process, there was legislation setting out the broad criteria for defining arterial roads, which you'll recall were really that arterials include those roads that have high volumes of general traffic, public transport and freight. And in the paper itself, attached to the paper, you can see a more developed set of the criteria that we've used to set out exactly what would meet those thresholds. I'll take all of that as read generally. We have, during the course of this process, engaging on those criteria, sought feedback from local boards through workshops and business meetings. We've brought this material to this committee and that workshop forum. We've had it endorsed by the Auckland Transport Interim Board, and we've engaged with officials from the Ministry of Cities, Environment and Regions and Transport. So the main changes that we've made as a result of that is that we increased the threshold from buses under the public transport significance criteria from 38 buses in a single direction to 48. We removed temporary high productivity mobility vehicle routes from the definition of significant freight, and then we recognised some specific changes around the Aotea, Great Barrier, Waiheke and Albert Eden. So we've responded generally to the feedback that we've received, and overall now the framework allocates roughly 75% of Auckland's road network, excluding state highways, to local boards, or defines those as being local roads where local board governance will work, and roughly 25% to the governing body. So in terms of those main elements of the framework, as I said, it's arterials, road carrying significant volumes of traffic, Eden Park and city centre precincts. Should note that the definition of arterials includes 30 metres down side roads. This ensures that we have a single cohesive decision making over all of those aspects that are necessary to effectively run arterials where the significant traffic occurs, and then land that's under council control that is contemplated to be in the remit of the governing body. I should say that this is a new element since we had the workshop. And the reason that we're talking about this element is that the definition in the legislation under the Land Transport Act, the definition of a road includes any place that a vehicle can access, so that covers parks and car parks that are under council control. And so as part of the framework, we needed to allocate those areas for decision-making purposes. And the approach that we took there, which is consistent with the legislation, is generally speaking where a park or some piece of land is under council decision-making already, governing body decision-making already, then we allocated that to the governing body. If it's under local board decision making, then we allocated that to the local boards. This was all based off the council's land parcel database. There's 12,000 land parcels that we were dealing with. Of those 12,000, 3,000 were unallocated. And so as an interim measure, we took the decision to allocate those to the governing body, and over the next 12 to 18 months we'll review those parcels in more detail, and then next time the framework is updated we can reallocate those land parcels during the review. I should say this is a reasonably minor issue because there are actually relatively few transport decisions made over parks and beaches and regional parks and whatnot. It's more of just a requirement to make sure that we're complying with the legislation. We are proposing a change control process where the framework is updated before every 3 years in line with the election cycles, although that will mean that we are doing an update within about 18 months. So that'll give us a chance to bed the framework down and fix any issues that we see that arise with this. And so finally, another key aspect of this is we are working up a public portal so that everybody can understand this new decision-making framework. Elected members and local boards and the public can go to the portal on the council website and see a map and understand which park, which road is under the decision-making of governing body or where local boards have their role. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible. And then finally, in terms of next steps for political approval, we're looking to submit it to the MSURP, to the ministry. Then it'll go to the Minister for Cabinet. Because it's secondary legislation, it will be presented to Parliament on we believe, the week commencing 1st of September, and then it'll come back here for final approval, and we're proposing to delegate that to the Mayor, the Chair of this committee, and a Hukura member yet to be identified. So in terms of the recommendations, they're in the paper. Approve the draft framework, delegate any minor changes to the Chair, and then provide it to the ministry officials so they can take it through the rest of the process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hamish. Questions, Lotu?
Kia ora, thanks Chair and thanks team. I just want to refer to the feedback from the Otara Papatoetoe Local Board at Roman number 3. They note that the spatial mapping shows large parts of the urban south, the southern isthmus and parts of West Auckland have more arterial and freight roads than other parts of Auckland. And they say that having more heavy vehicles going through their residential areas creates inequities, including things like clogging up residential streets and pollution, etc. Did your team respond to that feedback? And is that true? Is there a disproportionately higher number of arterial routes, freight routes going through residential areas in South and West Auckland? Kia ora.
I wouldn't say that there's a disproportionate number of freight routes going through residential areas. I should have been clear about the framework. All the framework does is it allocates decision making. So local boards have the new decision making, role provided by the legislation, and this is just a way of saying, okay, over which part of the road network will local boards get to make their decisions versus which part are going to be defined as arterials where the governing body will get to make decisions. So we're not changing freight routes in any practical way. The criteria define arterials as including areas of significant freight movement, and that includes some high productivity mobility vehicle routes. And really the effect of that has been to make most of the industrial sort of areas come under the arterials classification, and that may be the issue that the local board are referring to. We didn't respond specifically to them, but we did take the issue into account, and we think that allocation, it's sort of unfortunate that some local boards have more freight industrial areas than others. But we think that that allocation of those freight industrial areas, because they form really important part of regional networks, was an appropriate way to go to allocate those areas to the governing body.
Kia ora. And although those decisions sit with the governing body, the local boards can still feed in to those decisions, right?
Absolutely. The local boards will still be consulted on anything that goes on in those areas, and they can still advocate to governing body for changes that will occur in those areas. So that nothing in this framework takes away from those roles.
And you said every 3 years is an update of the framework?
That's right. We're proposing to review the framework every 3 years. So that would be the framework itself, the kind of criteria that we've got in there, and also the maps, because the network does change over time. Some routes may see more traffic. We may put more public transport on. So, routes may become arterials, or they may shift away from meeting the arterials definition. So hence the review. A 3-year cycle reflects that it does require approval by the minister. There is a bit of work to it, so we think that's the appropriate balance.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sarah?
Kia ora. One of the questions I had has been answered in terms of how will the public know which road is, whose responsibility. So you've said that about the portal, which is awesome. I presume, but just based on your description, I presume people will be able to type in their street name rather than finding it on a map, because that's hard, can be hard.
The expectation is that it would be both. You have an interactive map where you can scroll to an individual parcel or individual road, but you should also be able to search it.
Awesome. The other question I had is a bit more substantial. Private roads are whited out on all the maps, and I can understand why that is. But sometimes those private roads provide access to things like public parks, and that there can be some really difficult, awkward situations there. I think I've asked this in one of the workshops, but I guess what I'm trying to understand is if something comes up in that scenario. So, say for example, a bit of public reserve can only be accessed by a by a private road for whatever specific reason. Whose jurisdiction will that come under?
If the road is private, I think the right answer would be to say that it wouldn't appear under this jurisdiction. We wouldn't have picked it up in the allocation because it's not council-controlled land. I imagine that if the park it was accessing was a park that's defined as local land, then the local board would, that park would fall under the local board remit, and the local board would sort of take the lead on engaging on that issue.
Okay, because at the moment there are private roads where AT has access permission, but not, they can't fix it or whatever the situation is, but they are allowed to access it because it gets to one of those assets. So I guess the short answer is depends on the asset. Okay, kia ora.
Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just some rapid fire questions, I think. Just before the final, when we go through to the final approval, Hamish, it doesn't go in front of the local boards again between now and then, that process. Yeah. And I think you might receive some feedback. I'm just wondering how you dealt with it in terms of when state highway accidents occur and traffic has to be diverted across roads, and suddenly they become very busy when normally they're not very busy. They could potentially convert from a local classification, to a terrestrial potentially. Have we worked through that satisfactorily in your own mind?
What we did there is that for those roads that did see diversions, typically they'd be picked up on one of the criteria, so they would be defined as an arterial. But we're not, and Verna can correct me there, but we're not proposing to sort of change the classification in real time. We're only proposing to do updates every 3 years. So we've tried to, within the guidance of the legislation, capture those roads that do fulfil an arterial function, But if they don't necessarily pick up diversions, you know, that's just a matter we'll just have to keep an eye on in the review phase.
And what about paper roads? Where do we land with those?
Paper roads is covered in as well, and there's two categories. Majority of the paper roads goes to local board for decision making, but if the paper road falls within a regional park, for example, then it goes to governing body. So it's majority local board and some exceptions based on the parcel.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to check that. I thought so. And then the portal itself, when have we got a timeline when that might be available?
Expectations is that it should be available on day 1 in August.
Can't wait. Hope so. And finally, if there's ever a dispute, if there's a governing, if a decision affects both a local road and an arterial road, and a decision made by either a local board or the governing body, how do we work through those disputes, or how do we resolve that type of unintended consequence, or it's just as a consequence of a decision either body might make?
Unfortunately, I can't speak to that one. That's, I think, some advice that you'll receive separately on the overall decision-making process. I will say, though, that we have tried with this framework to make it as clear as possible which roads are sitting with which governing body to try and, with which, body to try and avoid areas where there are sort of overlapping jurisdictional elements.
Thank you for that.
Sorry, through the chair, if I could just add to that, we're reporting actually to governing body next week on that decision-making framework, certainly in principle. And in broad terms, if you've got a road or a couple of roads which are so interconnected, and one's local and one's arterial, for example, we think that the two decisions, so the governing body decision and the local board decision, can be made, kind of separately by those two bodies, but we would ensure that they're, kind of connected and the timing works together. Where there might be 2 or 3 local boards involved in an area, again, they can do it separately. There might be opportunities for more of a joint committee. So that's what we'll bring to you. In broad terms, we think those two matters can be done by the relevant decision makers, but we'll make sure the timing and everything fits together. That's how we think it will work.
Thank you, Megan. And just to relate another thought there in terms of NZTA roads, does that need to be part of that discussion?
Yes, because sometimes there will be maybe some exits or entrances in and onto the state highway. So again, we would want to work with NZTA just to make sure those timings go. But again, we're hoping in most cases, as Hamish said, there's a clear decision maker, and then that decision maker makes the decision, whatever that might be. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you.
Reg. John Gillen.
Well, thank you. Well, just on that disputes, there's actually a whole section in there about resolving disputes between the governing body and local boards, and if they can't agree, then it gets escalated to the local government commission. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the dispute process, but that is in the process that's coming to you, I think, next week, that Megan's been talking to, rather than what's in the framework.
Sure, but I think Councillor Sayers was asking what if there's a dispute over between the governing body and the local boards over some of this. Anyway, look, I've actually got a number of questions here. My first one is, I just want to confirm that today we are going to be adopting the maps as they are here, because I've got concerns about a number of irregularities and things that I don't think are quite correct. So what happens if post today those issues need to be addressed?
I think we have some limited scope for relatively minor tidy-ups. But otherwise, yes, we are seeking adoption of those maps as part of the framework.
And what if it contradicts local park management plans, reserve management plans, which show that local parks come under local boards, but here if we adopt something and it's either not yellow, it might be blue or grey, what's going to happen there? Which legislation takes precedence?
I mean, in terms of this framework only applies to transport-related decisions over those parcels of land. So, for example, things like, vehicle access to parks, parking management within areas that are defined as parks, vehicle access to beaches, things along those lines, where decisions need to be made here. Those are the only kinds of decisions that we're allocating under this framework. It doesn't go to RMA, it doesn't go to anything else. So, you know, that's the impact. And then otherwise, we've got an opportunity to tidy all this up over the next 18 months. As I said, there were a number, well, 3,000 parcels of land that in the database weren't allocated to governing body or local boards, and we made the call, since some of those dealt with some reasonably, I understand, you know, some complex property areas, in the short run to allocate them to the governing body, and then, you know, over the next 18 months they'll be reviewed, and we'll fix those allocations in the next review.
Okay, thank you. Now, a little while ago, and I can't remember when it was, I think we were told that you were proposing about 1/3 of the roading network to come under governing body, either through arterial or other means. What's that figure at now after all the revisions?
It's
Either percentage or kilometres?
roughly 26% would be defined as arterials. And I should say that's not a target that we set or anything like that. That's just the result of the framework. And that's in terms of roading network. We haven't applied that to the land parcels. No.
Okay, thank you. Look, I've raised before at workshops that I'm not happy with the thresholds that we've got to and how we've got to here. I'm happy with how the legislation is laid out, but I think they've left too much flexibility for council. So I've got some questions now on how you've reached these thresholds. So for arterial roads, why have you chosen the figure of 5,000 vehicles per day to be used as the threshold for between, you know, local and arterial? When that's inconsistent with the 10,000 that's used to define the difference between chip seal and asphalt. And it also means that there's a whole lot of roads that are actually not arterial in real life that are now showing up as arterial. So where did that 5,000 figure come from?
The 5,000 figure, we looked at a number of options here, AT staff in particular, and this one was chosen as it aligned with the NZTA's One Network Road Classification definition or threshold for arterials. And it also broadly aligned with the sort of allocation of roads that we'd already defined as strategic roads in AT's Future Connect framework. The matter of chip seal is more of a sort of economic decision about a threshold for when you know it becomes more sensible and economical to apply chip seal versus tar seal rather than a sort of roading functional allocation.
Well, it's also a wear and tear, an indication of how many, you know, how well used the road is. But NZTA's road classification has primary arterials and secondary arterials. So you've used the 5,000 figure, is that for secondary arterial, is it? Because that means that, I mean, looking at what you've come up with here, I would have defined it in a way that the secondary arterials were actually the connectors, and it's really only the primary arterials we're looking at. But yeah, I don't know, is that the question?
Yeah, for the purposes of arterial, if it's labeled as arterial, that's what we include as arterial, and they have different layers of arterial, from your busiest being your strategic arterials to the more minor arterials, but all of it, if it's labeled arterial, we classify it as that.
Yeah, I think that's part of the issue. Okay. On public transport, you've raised the figure from 35 buses per day to 48 buses per day. Can you just elaborate on that? Because it would seem that then in the 12-hour period that would only be like 4 an hour that you're looking at there. And so if a road carries only 4 an hour, then it gets elevated to arterial?
Yes. So the original proposal was to align with 38 buses an hour. Now, remember that the definition is a significant number of significant public transport movements. The original approach was to say that this align it with the connector network, which is 38 buses an hour in the busiest direction. However, following feedback, we raised that threshold to 48 buses an hour in the busiest direction, which is the frequent network. So in the context of the public transport movements, that number of buses an hour is very significant because that represents a frequent network where we're putting a great deal of resource in ensuring, you know, a 15-minute service, sort of 7 to 7 or better. So that they do play, it does play a very significant part of the roading network. Sorry, I should say of the public transport network.
Okay, I've got a question about the 30 metres. So you're proposing that where a local road or a connector road adjoins an arterial road, an intersection, that 30 metres of the non-arterial road will also come under the governing body decision making. However, how do you align that with the legislation which actually puts all local roads and connector roads under local boards in their entirety? It doesn't say you can take back portions of it. So the way I read the legislation, so how does that actually work?
I mean, the approach that we're taking is that, there's a couple of underlying reasons for this, but ultimately, where you have traffic controls such as stop signs or other types of traffic controls, they typically have sight lines, and those sight lines are up to 30 metres. So to exercise control and management of the arterial network, where the significant traffic movement is occurring, you actually need to exercise control and decision making, including that 30 metres where you may be requiring sight lines. So we've taken the approach that, you know, that 30 metres does form a part of the arterial network from a decision-making perspective where the significant traffic flows are occurring. This is also sort of simplifies the decision-making model because it's making clear that all the decisions needed to manage the arterials are sitting under one body, and that's the governing body. So it's sort of simplifying and streamlining the decision-making approach over the parts of the road network where the significant traffic flow is occurring. Okay. I should add that, we understand that there's a similar approach taken in London, and NZTA does something similar as well. So there is precedence for this sort of thing.
It's interesting because it's not how I read the legislation, which says that local board has the powers, functions, and responsibilities as per Schedule 4 in relation to local roads and collector roads within its local board area, which would include those 30 metres. I would read it that you actually have to ask the Governor-General and the Minister to formally revoke the local board authority over those 30 metre sections as per Section 47C4. So I don't agree with this. I also don't think it's needed to streamline because the legislation does say that the local board needs to take note of and consider, public transport and movement of arterial traffic and stuff in its decision making. I'll move on to the next one. Town centres, why are you designating roads going through town centres as being under the governing body instead of under local boards? I mean, these are clearly local board areas, and local boards are responsible for, place making and all sorts of stuff within the town centres. It just doesn't seem right that the governing body would be interested or have a regional significant interest in local town centres.
Those areas travelling through town centres still have significant traffic flows, significant public transport flows, significant freight flows. They still make up part of the arterial network. From a driver's perspective, that's still the same network that they've been on. So we recognise that there's a strong interest from local boards in placemaking in town centres, and local boards will have all the same ability to advocate for their local town centre areas, but those areas still meet the definitions in the legislation, and we wanted to avoid a situation where along a route or along a road, then governance of that route would change along the course of the route between, you might drive sort of couple of hundred metres, it's in a local board area where they're applying their localised set of rules, and then outside of that area, you're onto an arterial. So from the perspective of overall network management, the approach was taken to stick with the definitions in the legislation.
Thanks, John. Morris.
Yeah, I've asked Lata if it's possible by the email to bring up map number 10, because I just wanted you to have a look at it. I'm really only just getting some advice here. It's not that I've got a particular strong position either way. When the original legislation was tabled in the Parliament, and because the then Minister of Transport was a local MP, I actually went and saw him and I said, what did you mean by giving control back to the local board? Just, it was out of interest as to how far he wanted it to go. He said the intention, and the Cabinet paper's clear on it, is that we want to give back nearly every road and we can in an area other than something that is a major arterial route that joins on to a next local board, and therefore there can be boundaries and border issues and so on. And I said to him, well, in the area we are, what would you think that meant? And he named 4. He said Pakuranga Road right through to Howick. He said Te Rākau Drive where the Eastern Busway runs. He said Te Arangi that runs down to the bottom of the electorate at Te Otara, and a parallel road called Chapel Road. And then he said, basically that's it. And he said all the other roads should stay with the local boards for decision, because they don't, as you can see, the People's Republic of Howick pretty much doesn't border anybody. I used to be quite proud of the fact that 93% of my electorate boundary was water, so they couldn't stuff me around taking electorate boundary changes. But if you look at that, if you go down to the Highbrook, every road is blue. Every road down in that bottom left-hand corner, or middle left-hand. And if you go up even around the schools in Half Moon Bay, all the side roads and a place like Priestley Drive running up to it. So I'm just wondering, first of all, we've got a different Minister of Transport now, so he might see a difference from what the original minister saw. But if the original minister thought maybe 4 roads, I'm keen to know how we ended up with just a plethora of quite small side roads. As I said, Priestley Drive is a little wee road that runs from Bucklands Beach up to the Maclean's College gate. It has not what you'd call a major thoroughfare or major traffic or whatever. So when I look at that, the worry I've got, and I'll tell you, explain it, I can ask you the question of this. The original concern we had is that Auckland Transport kept making decisions isolated from the local community. And the legislation was going to give the local community back some power to have some say over their part of the world. And now it looks like a big chunk of that's going to go back to the GB. Now, there's no way the governing body's going to be sitting here every couple of weeks looking at every road in Howick or the other 21 local boards or 20 local boards. I don't quite know how we ended up with that much blue. And I wondered if you can explain, is that in keeping with what the original legislation wanted?
Thank you. Well, I suspect that the Minister had an original intent, and that's obviously modified by the words that Parliament approved in legislation. And we're sort of working to those words, and those words around the definition of arterial were the roads carrying significant traffic volumes, significant freight volumes, and significant public transport volumes. And in the case of, those industrial areas, we have said that the movement of heavy vehicles, high productivity mobility vehicles that need to work on a regional or even inter-regional basis is significant. And so that definition picks up a lot of those, the freight area that you can see in Highbrook. And I should say that this is highly supported by the freight industry. And then otherwise, we're picking up the main arterials or those places where we're running, the high frequency public transport routes. So we're ensuring that the governing body, through this framework, has decision making over the really core parts of the network. And as I've said, roughly 25% of the overall road network, the local sort of network under Auckland Council's control, is under the governing body versus 75% under the local board.
So just to pick up, the mistake I've obviously made is I've read very carefully the wording of the original cabinet paper and what was the intent. Are you telling me that the select committee and then the parliament changed those intentions of the original cabinet paper to broaden the definitions?
My recollection, and I do stand to be corrected, is that yes, this definition did change along the way.
Okay, all right. Well, then I've been reading the cabinet paper only, and that's my mistake. My bad. I apologise.
Okay, no further questions. I'll ask just on following up on that. So by my reading it, the Howick Local Board was in favour of what was proposed in terms of the arterial routes. Is that right?
I apologise, I can't recall.
No, it is. I mean, they support in general the arterial routes for freight and public transport. So, all good. Okay, any further questions on this? Okay, someone like to move? Thanks a lot to second Richard. Thank you, team. Big chunk of work, and I see Rebecca out the back there. Yeah, big chunk of work going and sitting down with every local board and discussing this with them and sort of trying to work together all of the different views. So a pretty tricky one. Any debate? No?
Yep.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I was expecting more people to want to talk to this. Okay. All right. Mr. Chair, I've been raising my concerns with the classification framework for a while now, and I'm afraid that I can't support where it has landed. The intention of the legislation that is bringing transport back under democratic control and accountability was to empower local boards with decision-making over local roads to ensure that decisions are made locally by elected representatives so the public can have the ability to raise concerns and requests locally. At the same time, arterial roads of regional significance are to come under the governing body. But there should be very few roads that meet this threshold, and they should be the obvious ones. Unfortunately, though, the legislation has been left too loose in the way it defines local roads versus arterial roads, so it has been left to Auckland Council to determine its own thresholds. Mr. Chair, I believe that what is in front of us today are the wrong thresholds that will result in too many local suburban roads being governed by the governing body as though they are regionally significant. Anyone living on a number of these roads won't be able to get their local concerns dealt with by their local board. This is not what the public are expecting, and I don't believe it is what the government intended when it passed the law. The governing body has no business making decisions over many of these suburban roads. If we pass what is in front of us today, we'll be squandering the opportunity to return roads to local decision makers. The maps on the agenda, and I was, like Morris, I've got a map here as well. The maps on the agenda show a ridiculous amount of arterial roads in blue. There is no way that these are all arterial roads. They've been called up as faux arterial roads because the thresholds are wrong. For vehicle numbers, the proposal says that any road that carries over 5,000 vehicles per day is an arterial road. That's way too low. And we heard earlier that that's because of the wider arterial grouping that's been used rather than primary arterials. Roads don't even qualify for asphalting instead of chip sealing until they reach 10,000 vehicles per day. And even that is too low to be considered arterial, and 15,000 or 20,000 is probably a more realistic figure to be used. On public transport, I acknowledge the proposals increase the threshold to 48 buses per day from the earlier draft that had 35, but that is still only 4 buses an hour, assuming a 12-hour period. Quiet suburban roads are being unfairly caught up. This threshold needs to be higher to qualify as significant volume of public transport, which is what the legislation requires. For freight, I acknowledge that the proposal again has removed temporary high productivity mobility vehicle routes, but again, there are still too many roads marked as arterial when they are local or collector due to being close to local industrial commercial areas. This threshold also needs to be higher. On top of this, governing body decision making will stretch 30 metres into all local and connector roads where they come off arterial roads. This is way over the top and undermines local decision making. The concern is that local boards might hold up decisions on arterial roads, but there is no need for that because in the legislation, local boards must have regard to freight and public transport through the area And it also says that when making decisions, a local board must do so in a manner that does not obstruct regionally significant transport projects and services. There is no need for this 30-metre rule. For the same reason, local boards can safely have authority over roads going through local town centres. They don't need to sit with the governing body. And lastly, while we're not dealing with it today, we need to bear in mind that at the workshop last week, it seems that many members are intending to support delegating the bulk of decisions allocated to the governing body back to staff. That will mean that a lot of the decision-making over these blue roads that have been taken off AT staff will actually be returned back to the same staff, which makes me wonder, what was the point in all of this? Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, well, I'll just cap it off. So I take a little bit of a different view on this, and I guess my fear is that we create 21 local roading authorities across Auckland, which is not the intent of the Act. So the intent of the Act is to allow the council to have greater say in things like the planning and the large stuff, whilst also putting back some decision-making to local boards and some to the governing body to enable local decision-making in the appropriate place, but also the recognition of the importance of our transport network which exists across Auckland. That would be hugely impacted if we had 21 different ideas going on roads that are arterial and spread across the area. The risk is that we then create an opportunity for this to fail. And I can guarantee that there will be very few people sitting in this room, and I know from having sat through, and Shane was the same, we sat through just about every local board workshop on this. There is anxiety on local boards about the level of decision making, about how many decisions they will have to make. I sat in one the other day when we were talking about the decision making, where there was anxiety about how much money they got paid to lift themselves because of the amount of decision making they saw themselves having to have. Another was concerned about what it meant for them in their community, making decisions that have been made by Auckland Transport up until this point that they're going to be responsible for, and what that made them look like in their community. Those are the sorts of things that we are getting from local boards. And yes, they want to be able to have more control over things in their communities, and they are going to get that. 75% of the roads or thereabouts, maybe 1% either way, are going to have the decision making made by local boards. That is huge. And I really do want to reiterate, the risk here is that if we drill down and pull back from arterials, and the 30 metres, as was mentioned, is applied by NZTA in a lot of instances. It actually works, and the reason for that is that it takes the importance of the network and those intersections into consideration, as opposed to having different setups, as opposed to having decisions that are made that don't consider vehicle tracking onto that road, and all sorts of things. There are so many examples where if we didn't have that 30 metre, which is one section, it's one residential section in general that we're talking about into the intersection, what it means is that intersection actually flows as part of the arterial. So, look, we can vote against this if you want, but my, I guess plea to you is that we can change this in 18 months' time if we find that this is an appalling abomination in Auckland and the wheels have fallen off and the sky has fallen in. But this is, I think there's been a lot of work done. The staff have talked with local boards, have really got fantastic feedback from local boards in regards to this. In general, you're always going to get bits and pieces that oppose and are different, but in general, the local boards are happy with this, and it is for, it'll be for 18 months. And so I'm suggesting there's a bit of science behind this. Quote my old mate Wayne Walker, who used to be here and said, look at the science. There's a bit of science behind this, and I urge you to just take the staff's advice here. They've worked, they've changed, and it is enabled through the legislation, and the ministry MCERT officials have basically agreed that this is an appropriate stance and can be done. They're waiting for us to see what we do with it. So I sort of urge you to accept this, and then we see what happens in 18 months.
So you've fundamentally changed your mind, Mr. Chair, that you think you've seen enough, you believe, to see it differently?
I'm supporting this, and I've never had a different view on that, Ken.
Oh, I thought, okay, talk to you later, thanks.
Okay, so no more. So we will put it to the vote. Those in favour say aye. Aye. And against?
Against.
Aye.
Record against, please.
So if you wanted to vote it, just let the staff know if you wanted to against.
Can they just call out, was that Councillor Fletcher?
So Councillor Fletcher, you were voting which way?
I'm voting in favour.
And Desley?
Yes.
And Joe?
Yes.
Good. Hope you're feeling better, Joe. Okay, thank you. It's carried. So we will move on. We're going to hear we'll consider the last three items together. So thank you, Shane. Second. Thank you, Morris. Any discussion, any questions? Happy to leave. Those in favour say aye. And against, carried. Thanks, everyone. The meeting is hereby closed. Thank you. You're now able to leave, Morris.